Okay, so this is going to be the site request process, which is going to be the very start of the site provisioning process. And along this journey, we're going to start with gathering the data needed to request a site similar to this, which is an extranet site meant for one of our locations, one of our partners' locations that we're collaborating with outside of the organization. So for the site request, we need to gather, as you can see here, the site name, the business unit information for the current user. You will notice that there are different site types that they can select. That's all going to generate down the road different site templates. When it comes to automation, these site types will select a different site template and provision a site based on that template. Not only do we grab information about the site, we also have some tricky things that we're going to work through in this particular video on, one, how you have dynamic fields show up based on the drop-down selection. Two, how do you have a cascading logic between two drop-down fields where behind the scenes, these drop-down fields are actually used in lookup columns, which is a very tricky situation. A lot of information here. I'm sharing all the tips and tricks that I use with creating these forms in Power Apps using the modern tool set. Let's get started. Okay, so we're going to actually walk through the process of what a sample request form or process would look like. And I think this is going to be a multi-step video series walking through the steps on how to build a site similar to what you see on my screen here. So in order to build one of these, we understood in the previous video how this is going to be originated. Let me just slide this screen over. This is going to be originated from a project site, and then within the project site you have an internal team managing the projects for Tesla superchargers, as an example, for a particular partner, where each partner will have various locations that need to be managed. So in the site request, what we're going to build a site request process to where you will order, as a project manager, you will order one of these project sites for your particular team. Now, working with a designer, they have a wireframe built out in this matter for the project request form. The biggest question is going to be, what's needed from the Power Platform? I think it's default. We're going to use the Power Platform to build this. But what tools and what strategy from the Power Platform we need to use to build something like this? So looking at this wireframe, very simple concept, especially for this revision 1 or this first iteration of this site, is very straightforward in the sense that there's only 2 screens. We're just capturing very basic data. The data can be a little bit tricky in the sense that business unit, site type, partner, and partner location, those are going to be all dynamic fields pulling from other lists. But the biggest question before you get started is going to be, is this going to be a Pro form, a Power App form, or a Power App Canvas app? And basically that means that, is this going to be a form that's going to be tied to a SharePoint list, or is going to be a form that stands alone as a separate app? And actually it's going to be both. It's not an or, it's an and. So we actually going to need both. And as we go through this series, stick with me here, you will see the scenario where you will actually need both and the strategy of why that actually works. Let's go ahead and get started. So here in the project portal, the first thing you want to do, and I'm going to search on site requests, is to create a subsite. Again, this is all about the site request process. Have a subsite dedicated to this process. Any Power App that you create, you want to have a subsite dedicated to that particular solution. It just gives you a lot more flexibility, and it makes your security that much crisp. So that's what we have here. So we have a site request subsite, or it don't necessarily have to be a subsite, but it should be its own entity is the point. Here, I'm going to just create a subsite because I don't see the need so far to have a site collection just for this particular process. So here we have the subsite. And again, if we flash over, we're going to keep toggling between these 2 screens. This is the wireframe that's needed. Very basic list that we need. Site name, business unit, site information, so on and so forth. So let's start chiseling away at these one at a time. So the first thing we want to do is build our site list. So within my subsite, I'm going to create a new list, and I'm going to just have this blank. Simply call this site request. And I'm okay with showing this in the navigation. Again, because this is its own entity, I have full control over the navigation. I have full control over the home page. So I'm not dancing around an existing site. So here I have the site request. And again, if I toggle back over, site name, because it is single line of text, we all know when you have this list, you get a title, you have to do something with it. So you either ignore it or you repurpose it or wherever the case may be. In our case, we're going to repurpose it. So let's go ahead and go down to site title, rename this to site name, and then click OK here. Everything else I can do from the modern UI. So here I'm looking at business unit and site type. Business unit is a drop down. On this particular site, we actually have business unit as a global organization entity. There is if I go to the root site collection here, I have a business unit list that maps the business unit for every employee within the organization. I love this approach because now this becomes a drop down of finite options, as well as if you look at this form with the business unit drop down, because I do have an existing mapping for the current user, I can actually default this to the business unit that's mapped in that list. Because of that, what we're going to do, we're going to actually create business unit as a single line text. So business unit is going to be a single line. Here's a new feature. If you actually do the display name, and I'm not going to get too crazy with the display name with special characters or anything like that. If you look at the internal name, it will actually create that site column name without the space. And it seems like that's only the case if you're creating these columns within the modern UI. Again, that's another pro tip to be aware of. So site type, again, site type is going to be a lookup. We have a separate list for site type. And the reason why this is a lookup versus a choice column is because we have other metadata related to the site type. So based on if you look at the form, when they select the site type, the description of the selected type is going to pop up over here, over to the right. We can also grow this to have a sample of what that selected site type looks like, maybe just a screenshot or a screen grab of a sample site for that particular type, and we can display that here. Because I want that type of rich functionality, that's actually going to be a lookup, and now I can grow this. You notice I don't have anything relevant to the image. I don't have any other information. Maybe from a development or automation perspective, we can add additional metadata for each one of these types. I can grow into that if this is a lookup versus a choice column. So that's the reason for that. So now if we go back to our site request, because of that, this is just going to be a lookup. Lookup is not an option here, so I have to I have to select more. And then with here, go ahead and select my site column, and this is going to be site type. Again, because I am in the classic UI, I have to be careful of my internal names. And then for the list to pull this from, that's going to be my site type list. And then for the site column, that's going to be the title of what, the information I want to display from that lookup list. And then we're ready to rock and roll. Again, if I go back to my wireframe, partner and partner location is going to be the same scenario. I have separate lists for them. This, I think, may not be obvious, but from a partner perspective, you want a finite list, so this definitely would not be a choice column. It leaves room for these to be renamed and add and managed in a dynamic way. And because this is also going to be cascading, so for each partner, I'm going to have various locations. And this is Wayo, and we have various locations. And what they're going to be able to do is select the partner, and then from the selected partner, select a particular location, and then the site will be provisioned for that particular location. And that's how we're going to handle that. So we have partner and partner location. And again, if I go back to my site requests, these are just going to be lookups. So again, I have to go to more, And let's just simply name this partner. And then we have a lookup. And then from that lookup, we just select the partners list. And then the column we want to display when they're selecting these is going to be the name. And I repeat the exact same process for the partner location. So hit more, partner location. Again, lookup. Just take this against the partner locations list. Select the column that I want to display when they're selecting one of these, and then click OK. Okay, so that's going to be partner and partner location. I'm going to do another pass to make these user-friendly names, but because we want to make our internal names very clear and defined, no spaces, no special characters, we're going to create, we have to touch these columns twice in scenarios where we just cannot use the modern UI within the SharePoint list. Okay, so the next one is going to be estimated users and then data classification. I'm okay with these two being choice columns versus lookup because there's nothing special about them. They're really just metadata fields. So let's just go ahead and do choice. And again, I'm going to do estimate users. And then from here, I actually have a list. So this is going to be less than 1,000. And this is the notation I'm going to use. Then I'm going to do a 1,000 through 5,000 as choice option, or 5,000 plus. And then in this case, whole organization. And these are my options for the estimate number of users for a site. So once we have that, we do another choice column for the data classifications. And then here, again, I'm toggling between using spaces, not using spaces, because it depends on the scenario that I'm working in. So data classifications, this is going to be very simple, general, internal, confidential, and top secret. Now this is just going to put a classifier on the list based on the request type, and then based on this classifier, we can now apply real security and compliance classification labels for these sites, and from there those classification policies would then define what a user can and cannot do as far as sharing, guest user access, so on and so forth. But that's not in the scope of this site request. We just need to understand from a requester perspective what type of data they expect to store in these sites. So that way, from a governance and compliance perspective, we can apply the right security and policy measures around this particular site. Okay, so that's going to be data classifications. And then we can grow into, let's see, the next one is going to be the primary owner and secondary owner. These are really straightforward. Anytime you're dealing with owners and they represent employees or users, part of our Active Directory, we're going to use the person column type. So here we just type in primary owner. Touch it again for secondary owner. And notice I'm not resetting the required field for any of these because I want my requirements and my validation to be in the Power Apps only. And that's a pro tip, because if you set your requirements on your data source, in this scenario, our SharePoint list, when we get to the Power Automate, we're going to run into a lot of hoops we have to jump through to do simple updates and things along those lines as we get through our process. And really that validation is only meant from a user perspective when they're completing this form. So again, that's it's one of those things that you learn along the way, especially from maintenance cycles and post-production activities, that you learn to put your validation, your requirements or validation piece on the Power App itself and not on the SharePoint list. That may be surprising for some of you, but for those who went through my courses and been through my tutorials on YouTube, is a very clear understanding why we do that, and we see it in practice and how we benefit from setting it in the Power App. The last option, the last field we have to set, and I think we're done with this one. And then we can jump into our Power App. It's going to be the description field. So here, if I do go back here and then add in a new column, multi-line text, really straightforward. Let's just do description. And notice what I have. I just have simple description here for multi-line text. I don't put in the special parenthesis and the verbose title here because that's what we consider a form-only clarifying item, and we don't necessarily need all of this text in our data model. Okay, so and again, that just comes with time where you learn to distinguish when to add verbose titles and labels, where to add them, whether it's the proper location to add them, and so on and so forth. Okay, so here let's just go and touch our columns with a simple rename. Actually, I want to edit this. So partner location, we save that there. Estimated user. We save that there. And then I think everything else we're fine. Okay, so this is going to be the shape of our list. And we talked about our decisions of, when we're using lookup versus choice. The next step is to jump into Power Apps Studio to start the build. So here I'm gonna just go to Power Apps, pop this open a new tab, go to new, and then just say new. I actually want to create a blank app and then make a decision. I have to be very careful on how I create this. So I think I want to do a blank app, and I want to make it a tablet, and let's just call this site request. See, I don't want this to generate the multiple screens for me though. Let me see, apps, new, canvas. Nope, I don't want, yeah. And then here I can select the tablet layout. I have to be very careful how I create these because I didn't want it to create those three, the display, edit, and those other screens for me. So now that I'm here, the first thing I want to do is name my screens. So let's just call this screen main. And now what we have to do is just bring in a form component. And the form component is going to do all the heavy lifting for us. And we want to do an edit form because the user is going to complete this form. So we select edit form. And again, if you look at a wireframe, we have the form component contained over on the left, and then we have room to grow other items on the right. So with that, we just eyeball it, shape our form, and then we connect to a data source. So we do add, and we want a SharePoint type data source, and then I just selected one of my names here, and that's going to connect me to all of my previous sites. Here, my list is in site requests, and that's my new one, the site request list, and then that's going to connect. So now I need to go to the data source, bring in the one I just wired up, and then that's going to bring in all of my fields. Now, when this comes in, the first thing I like to do is to select this to a gray theme. And you want to select a gray theme because now it gives you a vanilla canvas to start to brand, and you're not fighting with the blue or the green or the orange that comes with the other themes. I love to start with the gray, keep it vanilla, and then that way I can go in and start to build my other ones. Now, if I look over to my wireframe, it makes sense to do a 2-column layout because most of my columns are going to be 2-column, even though I do have single row peppered in there. So here I just go to my form, go ahead and select 2-column, and then that will at least start the process for me. The other thing I love to do is to rename my form. Again, my forms, any rename, I start with the prefix is going to be the type of component it is, in this case form, in that case screen, and then that's how I go ahead and do my renaming. A lot of these fields I do not need, and a lot of these are not in the proper order yet. So let's just keep toggling through and start to place these in the right order. So we have site name, business unit, and site type. In order to modify the ordering, I just go to edit fields here, site name, oops, I forgot that quick. Site name, business unit, site type. Site name, business unit, site type. That's perfect. The other one is going to be partner and partner location. Partner, partner location. We're getting lucky. Estimated user data classification. Estimate user data for class, primary, secondary. What is I've never seen this. I've never seen these come in the exact same order that's needed. So that makes our lives a little bit easier, and we can fast forward in this video. So here we don't need the attachments. Let's go ahead and remove that. And based on our wireframe, we need a touch. So they want the site name to have the entire row by itself. And that's pretty straightforward. All you have to do is do a little math. Go and see that the current width is 355. Multiply that by 2. So in our scenario, it's going to be 710, if my math is correct. And that's going to stretch out nicely across the needed areas. Now, notice once I did that, business unit became aligned by itself, and then site type became aligned by itself, and we actually want these to be on the same line. So let's go ahead and touch this. You notice what I did. I just touched the end unit that woke it up and realized that, oh, I can be on the previous row because I have enough room. Everyone else adjusted accordingly. Now, everything else should be according to the wireframe, partner, partner location, estimate user, so on and so forth, with the exception of description. So here, two things we have to do with description. We have to tell it to multi-line edit, so that way it feels that it's editing a multi-line text box versus a single line, and then we also need to stretch it across for the entire row. And again, just do our math here, and that's going to be our 710. And the last thing we want to do, because we didn't do this in the site column, is give it its name. So let's just go ahead and unlock it, and then right here on the display name, we can now put our purpose for the site. We can kind of get verbose with our tagging, leaving our data model clean with our name. So once we have this, let's go ahead and do our site column, push this up to the form control, push this up to the top, and start making waves or room for our buttons. Again, let's just flash over. First thing we want to do is tackle our header. This is very simple. That's a label, that's a rectangle, and then that's a logo. So now we just go ahead and drop those in. Hit my plus sign, just put in label, text label. Let's go ahead and get the rectangle. And then for a logo, we just bring in the image control. Okay. So just drop our image right now. Just place that over to the left. Put our form title up here at the top. Let's go ahead and stretch this all the way across. Because we have to use rectangles to make lines, our height are usually default to a 2. And then I knock off any borders off of this. So right now the border is set to none. That's great. And the color we want to use is going to be our tassel color. So for right now, I'm going to just go ahead and just arbitrarily select the default system red. Okay. So then when it comes to our title, notice I'm in the 0, 0 coordinates, meaning that I'm all the way to the left, all the way to the top with this. And then we just put in site request form. And let's go with a default, maybe a 20. Stretch this all the way across. And we want to put a padding on the left. So our left padding is going to be 20. These are like the default numbers that I use anytime that I'm shaping up the title of a form. This line here was eyeballed, so let's just move this down a little bit. Just create enough headroom for this title, and that should be sufficient. And now on the other side, we need to reshape this for our logo. So we want our logo above the line, and we want to go ahead and pull in an image. This is going to land me on my local desktop. Just grab the red Tesla logo. And I may have to play around. So let's put a padding on this. Let's just do a 2 all the way around. That gives us enough breathing space. And then just touch it, resize it a little bit. Again, this is all subjective. This is all a personal preference. But, you know, in the end, we want this to look very similar to what we have here on our site request form. So now let's go ahead and throw a little bold on here just so it pops. Okay, so that's fine. And now let's go ahead and wire up our footer. So in the footer, it seems like we need to do, again, another horizontal rectangle as a line, and then the 2 buttons for submit and cancel. So basically what I done, once you went through all the work to get the header together, because it's the exact same line, I just copy that, use the arrow key on my keyboard, position that towards the bottom, and that becomes my bottom line. And I have no idea why it disappeared on me like that. Let me just make sure the ordering is right. Let's say bring the front. Maybe touch the height a little bit. I've seen situations where ooh, I lost it. Where the, let me try this again. Where the height is not enough for the line to render. And sometimes it becomes a zoom in, zoom out situation. So let's see if we can find it now. So here we have, here's our second rectangle. We have the color correct. And again, let me try to touch this height, maybe a 4. And then now back down to a 2. Again, it's just one of those situations. It just seems a little bug there where you have to play around with it, especially from a copy-paste situation to bring it alive. So now let's go ahead and drop in our buttons. And usually with the buttons, it's the same scenario because you have to do so much work to get these to get the right size and the right layout, look and feel. What I tend to do is get this working for one and then use that and copy and paste it for my other one. So here, let's just make this submit. As far as the button size, the text size, I'm gonna drop that down to maybe a 12. Now let's just go ahead and put the rounded corners on here. So we have the border radius. I usually go with like a 3, somewhere between 2 and 5. In this scenario, I'm gonna do a 3. And as far as the color, we're gonna do the Tesla red. I'm okay with the white text because that really makes it pop. And then if you zoom out a little bit, what we have to do is make sure this is centered. And there's a scenario we can do with that. So here, let's just, now that we have this built, copy and paste this. Again, put this alongside the left side. And this is going to be our cancel. It gives them an option to get out of it. And then basically what we can do, let's just drop this color down to a light gray, or actually a white. And then the text color is going to have to be the gray. And then the border color, we just going to, again, complement the brand. So with the border color, we just go with the red. And that complements the brand. So that's going to be our cancel. And now what we have this, what you have to do, you have to eyeball this to center it. And usually there's a bounding box to kind of help us with the center. And because the bounding boxes, you know, help us with the center, we definitely want to complement our form and make sure our form is in alignment with that. Right, so that looks like that's about half. Again, this is all subjective, so you just play around with it until you find what works for you and what works for your eyeballs, and you're ready to rock and roll from there. Okay, so now we have that. Now we want to dress up the right side. Again, looking at our wireframe, we have an image control for the current user's profile pic. We have sample text here, and then we have a nice graphic towards the bottom. And we can talk about the logic, like how we're going to use these in the future video. But for right now, we just want to do the placement. And then we would do a round of formulas to get things in. So we just want to do a text label for our sample text. And then just stretch this out. Now the question is going to be, how are we going to do this alignment? So I'm going to use this left image here to do this imaginary line towards the bottom. let's just do our sample text here. And now let's do a image control. And that'll be our image control. So now we just put that here, stretch that out. And then basically what we want this to do a fill, because whatever image we put in here, we want it to kind of fill up the entire area. So let's see if we can find something. Maybe we just do this graphic here as a placeholder, just to make sure everything's coming in as expected. And then for our text, there's a few settings we have to set here. So we want to make sure that our text, we're bringing this top alignment. So that top align is going to be here on the vertical alignment. So just make that top. And then I have some sample lorem ipsum text here that we can use as placeholder just to make sure that our text is showing up as expected. There we go. So this is just, again, just going to help us with the placement and the ordering here. There we go. So that looks very similar to our wireframe. We probably can play around with the spacing, but I think for the most part, this is enough to get us started. Okay, so now what we want to do is to go through, and as we mentioned before, we don't put our required fields on the data source itself. We want to put these required fields on the Power App. So let's go ahead and do that. So in order to put our required fields in there, we have to touch it, unlock it, and then go down to the required property under advanced and then hit true. Because I'm going to do this for a bunch of these fields, I'm going to just remain here, unlock, and then everything I need to make required, I'm going to make required here. Now, partners is going to be a conditional require. So let's hold off on partners because that's going to be based on the site type selected. For estimated users, I want to say all of these are required except for description or purpose of the site. So let's just go, let's go in and drop these in here. And again, this is the same process, just unlock and then tap. And this is what you're seeing here because I'm doing this for, many fields at the same time. This is where the advanced feature, the advanced property setting really comes into play. And again, this just takes time and over your cycles as you get comfortable and fluent in building these out, that you start to realize when the property options over here on the right are better suited for some scenarios compared to the property options that you have in the drop-down. They're one and the same. I have yet to find something that I can do here that I can't do here. It may be a translation of the name of the property, but for the most part, you're going to have all of the properties available in both scenarios. Okay, so here we have our form, and now what we're going to do, we can now save this, because I don't like to go too far without saving it. And let's just call this our site request form. And then save that here at the lower area. And I'm not ready to share it because I'm still in development mode, so I'm not ready to share it. But I do want to pop over here on the site requests. And let's confirm things are rendering and looking the way we expect it to look. And we can start to drop in our formulas. So this is a big issue. Right, so it says getting data ellipse, but basically it's stuck, and this would never render until you fix the issue that we're having. So now if I go to our site requests, and I'm going to just reposition my tabs here so that my flow, the way I'm toggling between these is right in alignment. So let's go back here. Let's look at our form component and our item property. This cannot be blank. You have to specify the default item for the form component, and what I'm going to put in here is the defaults method, which says I want to create a new record, and that's what they're doing. So when they launch this form, they're putting in a new request, so this is going to be a new record. So once we kind of save this off and then publish it and then go through our cycles of refresh, this should now start to render as expected. Usually costs a couple of refreshes here. Let's see. Maybe let's kill it and go back into it. So let's Go here, hit play. Still doesn't like something. Okay, there we go. Okay, so now we have this information. So now we want to do maybe do a site request for another whale location. See how far we can get before we start to identify. So here I have the business unit. I don't want my users to manually type in. I want to be very helpful because you're going to get many variations here. So I want to be very helpful, give them a default with the ability to overwrite. So that's one formula we have to drop in. The other one is going to be the project type. So for this scenario, this is going to be a project for a partner. And when I select a project for a partner, only then should I have the partner and partner location options. If it's an option other than the project partner site type, these should not show. And the other requirement is if it's a project partner, these will display, but they will be required. So we have to make sure that the current user fill these in. So that's the logic that we have to put in. So I'll add that to our list to do. And then for when there is a partner, this location list should be filtered based on the selected user or the selected partner. Because all of these, like only 5 or 4 of these are BP, the other ones are Shell, and the other ones are Wayo. So we definitely want this to have like cascading experience. So we'll talk through that. There's really nothing to change here for the estimated user. Data classifications, that's pretty straightforward. It's nothing to change there. When I go to my primary users, I think this is fine. There's really nothing to change there. And then the purpose of the site, I think we should be okay. So our buttons here are fantastic, but they're only for show. They're not wired up. And look at that. Our horizontal lines in both scenarios are not there. So we probably have to bump those up to another height. Okay, let's get started. Let's go ahead and let's save those cosmetic items towards the end. Let's really focus on the formula because I think the formula is where most of the magic happens. So for business unit, what we want to do, we want to wire this up to default to for the business unit for the current user. So in order to do that, let's go ahead and bring in another data source, and that's going to be our business unit data source. And that's actually in a separate site. And that's the beauty of, if you're coming from InfoPath, Nintex, or some of those others, third-party solutions that we're used to working with on-prem, you would notice that to pull data from, it's one thing to pull data from the same site collection, that's one thing, but to pull data from a different site collection could be a chore. So here we want to search for business unit. So the site I'm looking for is going to be the, I don't know the name of the root site. So I have it bookmarked here. So let's go ahead and look at, looks like it's called Classic Team, but I can copy that URL, and hopefully this works. Let's see, if I copy the URL, and then hit connect, that took me directly to that site. That's a great shortcut if that recent site, which is for the most part helpful, but if it's still not finding what you're looking for, just grab the URL and connect it that way. So now that I have 2 data sources. So I have my site request, which is meant, fill this out, it's going to say the information there. And then I have the business unit, which is really meant for selecting the business unit for the current user. Now, this is a single line text, so I have to do a little work here in the sense that for the default, I actually probably want to do this on, there's a couple ways you can do this, but I think for our scenario, we probably want to do this when the app is initially started. So if I select on the app node, and this is where you put a lot of your on start or prefix information or initialization step within your process to where you want to prime your form and get it ready to gather some data that you may use within the form itself. So on start, I wanted to do this lookup. I wanted to look up the business unit for the current user. So the source, that's going to be business unit. So just go ahead and select that. And then the condition is going to be, let's take a closer look at this list to confirm the condition. So now if we go down to the business unit list and kind of get a sense of how we need to filter this, that's going to be the employee field. So we have, for the current user, we have to pass in a attribute to pull to match on the employee column. And then based on that record that's returned, we need to grab the business unit value. So now if we take a look at this, so we need to grab the employee, and that's the beautiful thing about Power Apps. It will provide you with IntelliSense. And another thing to note, because we're dealing with a rich column type with a person group field, now we can match on something distinct. And I would recommend doing something more definitive, like the email versus like a name or something along those lines that can be easily duplicated, especially in very large environments. So here we just do the lookup, and that's going to bring back a record. And you can see that by the condition that's here. If you look at this type, and now we can set this to a variable, and we can make up the variable. So let's just call this var bu or something like along those lines, probably a little bit more descriptive. But the var bu is going to hold the business unit for the current user. And now what we can do, if we go down to this text field under the text property for this text box, or is it going to be, or the default value, sorry. So for the default value, instead of selecting parent, which is going to be always empty in this scenario, we can now just hit var bu, and then that should set, it's looking at it's saying that it's a record type, and it should be a value. So here, let's just correct that. So we go to set var bu. Oh, of course, because we're setting the entire record to the BU. We don't want that. So from that record, we want to do dot and then business unit, and that's going to be the value. Okay, so now if we go back to this guy here, just retype it so it can reassess it. It's still coming back as, because this is I think I understand why. This business unit is a choice type. Is that correct? Yes. And because it's a choice type, you got to do a little bit more work to get the true value. So again, so we go back to business unit, that's going to be all of the choices or just a controller as itself, and then you have to do a select dot value to say, okay, from that choice column, give me the value that was actually selected for the business unit for the current user. Okay, now to test this out, what you have to do, and I love this about the Canvas app versus a Power Form, is that with the Canvas app, I can do run and would execute this in real time and notice what happens. Now it actually did that lookup for me as the current user, and it says, oh, you're part of the executive leader's business unit. So let's see if that's still true. So if I go to the list and then filter on, or just sort these, I can easily find my name. And then that's my name, and that's going to be executive leaders. Now imagine this scenario where I changed business units because I went to a different department. Maybe I move over to marketing. Now if I go to the Power Apps, and again, to re-execute everything in your on start, just run this on start, and it would pick up the updated value. Right? So now every time our form is grabbing updated information based on what's happening in a different list housed in a different site that may be managed by another team, our form will always have the latest and greatest information. And this is the benefit of using a lookup versus a choice column. And now because this is the default value, in a scenario that a user feels that this is not correct, they have an opportunity to override it, else they can accept the default value and continue on with the next field. So here we have the various site type. And site type, there's nothing special that we want to do here, probably outside of the exception of maybe updating this text, but we'll save that for a later part of the video. The one thing we do want to do with site type is that we only want these data cards to show if and only if the site type selected is project partner. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to just, and this is very easy to do. So the first thing you want to do is, let me explain what we're going to do, and then we'll walk through the steps on, on the technique on how to do it. So basically all you need to do is set the visibility on these two to be false, or only true if the selected value for site type equals project parenthesis partner close parenthesis, right? So in order to do that, what you want to do, because we're going to have to use the selected value from this drop down, we want to give it a name. And if you went through any of my Power App courses, you would notice that there is the best practice rule is anytime you use a data card or any of these controls in the formula, you want to give it a custom name that makes sense to that formula. If your formula has data card key and then a number, or data card value and a number, that's so confusing, because in the formula, especially if you have a bunch of these references, it's not clear exactly what you're referencing. So let's be crystal on our reference. So we're going to do V site type. And for those who follow me, you know that V represents the value, meaning that the selected value. And then site type represents the column or the thing that we're referencing, right? So now we do the V site type. So now we have that drop down in our renamed and primed and ready to go. So now all we have to do is go to the visibility property for the thing that we want to hide and do a condition. So basically you're going to say if V site type dot selected, and this should be selected because we're dealing with a drop down, so there's different property values that you have to kind of go down through, and it's going to be selected that value. But notice what we have here, because we're dealing with a lookup column. The lookup column has more for the selected item than just the value. It actually has the internal ID. So in this scenario, we just want to use the value because we're going to do a text comparison and basically say if it equals project, and really all I'm doing is typing in following the case of the selected option there, right? So if the v.selected value equals partner project, parenthesis partner, then show. If it doesn't equal that, then hide. So let's test that. So I hold on my Alt key, and now I can test these real time and see what happened. This is a beautiful thing. So if I select any other type outside project partner, my partner data card was hidden. Else it shows if I select the targeted one. So here's the good news. The good news is all I have to do is copy this, because it's the exact same formula for project partner. Select the visibility property and then paste that in. So now if I, again, testing this again and look, and you would notice that any other site type, those are hidden. And then if I select the targeted site type, those appear. Now, here's the beautiful thing. This is why following a practitioner in your training is super important, because a practitioner build Power Apps, they run them through production, they understand the maintenance cycle. So now when you rebuild things, like the way I'm building this now is totally different how I would have built this solution 12 months ago, 18 months ago. Part of it because now Power Apps is very feature rich and very competitive compared to some of the other solutions and third parties out there. But two, the experience. And now you get a leg up because you get these nuggets, tips and bits of a practitioner to really kind of save you on some of the gotchas that are waiting for you 4 months in the future from now, right? So using a part of those tidbits is using a form component. Notice what happens to all of my fields. Everything gracefully adjusts based on what's available and what's not available. If these were single labels and components pasted or positioned on the screen without using a form control, you would have to do a lot more work to simulate this experience. And because we're using the right component for the job, we get a lot of things for free, and things just naturally work and very little effort on our side. Again, pro tip. So, okay, so now we have that wired up. The other thing that, and we talked about this, is that when partners show, then I want to make them required. If they're not visible, I can't have them required because then I block the user from submitting the form because I have required fields that are not populated, right? So it's almost like a catch-22. Very interesting scenario to overcome, but a very easy way to overcome it. So basically, all you have to do is go to the require, make this conditional. So it looks like it's locked because it's not editable. So let's unlock it. And basically, if this is going to be required, now watch this. Now this self option is new or relatively new. And basically what you can say is, okay, for this current control, if it's visible, then make it required. That's all you need, right? So again, very simple initial work as expected. So now we have to practice, do it in practice. But let's go ahead and update the other one. So again, required, unlock it. Very simple formula. And I love the elegance of this, and I love the simplicity of it. And I love everything about it actually. And now this is ready to rock and roll. So again, if it's visible, make it required. If it's not visible, it's not going to be required. And it allows those other conditions to go through the submit process. Okay, so now that's done. The other piece we want to test, so estimated users, nothing there. Data classifications, nothing there. Primary user, primary, secondary owner, nothing there. I think we're ready to wire this up. Oh, the most important one, the photo. So here we want to set this image to the current users. So that's just going to be user method dot image. Very straightforward. And that's going to be the profile picture of the current user. We love the round, right? So the tips and tricks with making it round is that whatever your size of the square or the image control is, you want to put that same size on your radius. So now if I go down to the border radius, I just want to make that 100 because my height and width is 100, and that gives you a perfect circle. All right. So again, this is no functionality here. It's just more of a branding item that says you're filling this out, and you can relate to it, and all the other reasons why we use profile pics, right? Okay. Can we tackle this? Maybe. Let's get this form submitting, then we can circle back. Because we've been on this for a while. So okay, so let's just submit the form, and to save this form to the SharePoint list is really straightforward. Like all we have to do is save it, but we want to navigate to a confirmation screen, right? So if we go back to our wireframe, here's our form, here's our confirmation screen, and basically this submit button does two things. It saves the form data to the list, and then it navigates them to the screen saying that you're all done. Here's a great confirmation. Go ahead and close and go about your merry way. So let's go ahead and wire it up. So the first thing we want to do is select this, go to the on select. And it took me a while to relate on select to on click, but after a few cycles, you get used to it. So for on select, we want this to simply submit the form main, and you're done. Okay. Again, this is pro tip. This is another reason why we use the form component to lay out all of our fields versus individual, because if you did this on an individual component basis, now you're dealing with a very nasty, very long patch statement, and making sure your JSON object that you use in order to do the patch statement correctly is properly formatted, have the proper syntax, and all the other hoops that you have to jump through when you do things that way. If you do use a form component, one single statement, you're done. It's going to save this. And it has a beautiful maintenance story, because now later in the cycle, if we work with our business users and they come back and say, oh, we need this one additional property or attribute we need to capture on the site request form, we add that, and there's no change here, because anything that's on the form is going to get submitted within the single statement. And only the changes for the form will be submitted with this single statement. So it's very smart. It's a single statement. It takes into account many conditions that we get for free because we use the right component for the job. Okay, so now what we have screen main, all we need now is a confirmation screen. So let's just select one of the default success screens here. And then let's just go ahead and rename this to screen success. We don't have a form on this one, so there's no form to deal with. And as far as our colors, you know, to kind of match our branding, we want to do the icon circle and then give that our branded color. And that's going to take that into account. And then we maybe have a close button. So we did a lot of work already on these buttons. So I'm just go to one of my previous screens, copy that button, go to my success screen, paste that button, and then position that right in place, and then tell it, give it a text to close it. And then when they click this, because I did copy that button, the formula came with it. For close, we just want to exit. And then we're going to say log them out of the system, and that should be false. We don't want to log them out. That'll be a bad thing to do. Okay, as far as branding, oh yeah, remember our rectangles disappeared on us? So I think all these rectangles have to be a 3. Let's just make them all a 3. So that way we don't have this, sometimes they're here, sometimes they're not, situation going on. Okay, so as far as branding, the header, we just want to grab all of this, and hopefully my select grabs everything. Mouse over here, do a Control-C to copy, go to my other screen, select on the screen so that way it's active, and then Control-V to paste. And I love that because as you see, it puts everything in the same coordinates of the previous screen of where you copied it from, saving you a ton of time. Okay, I think we're done, right? So now from the submit, we put a semicolon in here because now we want this to navigate to our success screen, and then close a parenthesis on that. And then on cancel, we're going to do something very similar that we did for the close. We just on select for the cancel, we're just going to say exit false. And false is for do we want to log them out. Okay, let's test our work, make sure we're working as expected. Let's go ahead and publish this up. And now if I go to the screen here, I do a Control F5 to refresh. That's a hard refresh. Control F5 again. And let me just put in, no, I didn't get my business unit, so this is not ready for me. And my buttons are not working. This is not ready for testing. So let me close out, go to my Power Apps screen. Let me get a refresh here. And now let's run this in play mode and see if I get the latest and greatest. And I should get my business unit here. There we go. Perfect. So that's a great indicator that I'm primed and ready to go. My rectangles are there, so they're taking in my new height of 3 versus 2, and they seem to be visible. So here, let's just do K99, whatever. That's my WAYO site type. We are doing a project with a partner. Notice what happened. That looks great. Now if I click submit, ooh, gotcha. That's a gotcha, right? That shouldn't happen. If my form is not validated, I shouldn't go anywhere. I should remain on that screen. Let's fix that. This is why we test, right? If you're creating forms and Power App solutions and you're not doing unit testing, you're, one, spitting out not the highest quality solutions that you possibly could, and two, you start to build a reputation of building questionable solutions because your business users test for you, which is not a good thing. Okay, so with this navigation, we need a conditional navigate. And basically, this is counterintuitive, but it works if you start to understand and embrace the logic. So basically, there's an if statement. We get that. But you want to test and see if form main is valid. So dot valid. And if it's valid, then you navigate. And if it's not valid, then you don't do anything. Okay? And actually, that's pretty straightforward. And part of this is because I have this position in the right spot. Here's another pro tip. in the sense that if it's not valid, this will always tell you if all your required fields are populated or not. And really, that's all it does, right? It says, okay, for the components on this, this instance of the form control, let me see if everything that says required actually has a value. And if it does, it returns true. If it doesn't, it returns false. Now, here's the issue. The issue is it's not valid. You can check and see if it's valid or not, but the user won't be able to see the messages. So now you almost have to force the user to see the invalid messages, so that way they can go and fix them and then try again and then see if it passed validation. In order for the users to see it, you have to submit the form, right? So, and if it's not valid, there's no data that's going to be saved. So because of the way that this is positioned, regardless if it's valid or not, I'm going to always submit the form. But only if it's valid would I navigate to the success screen. And that's why this simple check works. And it only works because the submit form is happening before you validate the form. It's counterintuitive, but it works. And I guess that's just the Power Apps way of doing this. And to be fair, what Microsoft does from a UI pattern, they actually have these buttons disabled by default, and they will use form.valid to only enable them once everything is completed. So we can actually do that as well. So I have this validation check that says I'm only going to navigate if this is valid. The other thing I want to do is look at my display mode for my button, and then put another visual check in here that says if, and I'm gonna put a comma here because that helps me with typing out or composing this if statement, if existing items exist. So if form main is valid, display the edit button, meaning make my button usable. Else, display mode, I'm gonna make it disabled. And disable is hidden most of the time, so just scroll down. Let me just finish typing display mode. And display mode dot disable. Right. So again, so if it's valid, allow my button to be enabled. If it's not valid, disable my button. And you can see the treatment that you get for a disabled button. And again, if you want to customize the color, there's a disable color, and let's just give this no, that's ugly. No, that's even uglier. Okay, what's happening here? Okay, let's do, what does a disable look like? Maybe something like this? Yes, but the text have to pop. So for a disabled color, notice for the disabled color, you have a color wheel for the text, and then you have a separate color wheel for the field on the button for the disabled condition. All right, I think this is good. So let's save this off and publish it. So that was a good catch. Actually, I missed that with developing this, but we caught it because we unit test. So here, let's go to Power Ups again. Let's kill that. That was a misfire. And let me do a refresh here. And then now let's go ahead and launch this in play mode. Okay, so there's my marking condition. Let me just put in gibberish for here, and let me test my validation. Nope, that's not the latest and greatest. So hit F5. First thing I want to do is test my, oh, there we go. There we go. So I did an F5 and notice that my button is invalid. So, which is great, or disabled. Now if I go through and put in all my needed information, it gets enabled once everything is populated. Now watch this. Here's the validation check. Let me select a project partner. Oh, this is one thing we forgot to do. It's to filter project partner location. So we'll go back and do that. But notice how my validation is enabled now. And that's the one thing about these drop downs. Like once you select something, it's hard to unselect it. So let's see there. Okay. That's how you do it. It's a little kludgy, but that's how you do it. Okay, so here, partners Partner is not filled in. The partner type is selected, and I'm disabled. Great. I'm dealing with a type that's not a partner. I didn't have any partner data. So again, remember that conditional required field? That's working as expected, and we're ready to rock and roll. Okay, so now if I hit submit, that looks good. From a UI, we look great, right? Let's confirm in the list, are we actually saving anything? So now if I go back to my site request list, and here you go, that's my information, and my partner columns came over empty, and that's great. If I put that, made any of these required on the list, this thing would have blown up, and I would have been locked in with doing some very fancy conditional check and validation check on the front end. Okay, very last thing. So let's go ahead and switch back to Studio. Now, before we jump into the logic that's needed based on the cascading dropdown, and what we want to achieve is that based on the partner that's selected, we want the partner location to only show the locations for this selected partner. And for most scenarios, that would be pretty straightforward. But for our scenario, we have to take a closer look at how the relationships are trickled down. So we have the request, and that's going to be looking at these two columns, so the partner and then the selected location. But understand how the partner location is set up. Because if I go to the request, the partner location here is just a lookup field to this list here. And now when I come to this list, this partner column is a lookup to this list. So now we actually have a scenario where we have a lookup to a list, but the thing we need to filter on is a lookup column to another list. So we have a lookup of a lookup. Because of that, there's a formula that we have to take into consideration. Now, the first thing is first. The first thing we want to do, we want to take this selected value and filter this dropdown. Because we're going to use the selected value from the partner dropdown, we want to rename this to something that makes sense. So once we have it in our formula, we're not using generic names. So we have that name. The other thing we want to do is go to the selected dropdown here. Instead of using the choices, we actually want to filter this based on this selected value coming from the partner list. Now, in order to use the partner location list, we actually need to bring that in as a data source. So here, let me just search on SharePoint. That's going to be another SharePoint data source for us. And then I select my connection. That list does live in the request site, and it's going to be the partner location list. Okay, so now this is available to me. Now, from the items, we have our choices removed. Replace it with a filter function. And then just start typing partner, and it's going to give you the location name. Now, this is where we have to be careful. In this partner location, as we saw before, in this list, we want to filter by this column, which is yet another lookup column. So we want to filter on the partner column. So let's just type in partner. And because this is a lookup, there's another property value. So we have to do dot. And there's our lookup evidence. Lookup columns return two values, an ID and a value. And those are actually wrapped into an object. So we're going to filter this on value. And this should probably go pretty nice. And we're going to filter on the value selected in the partner. Right? And then again, because this is a lookup, we have to do the dot, select it, and then dot. Those are two options that we get for lookup column types. Select value there. And then now that should do the trick. If everything is, nope, I did an extra comma. I should have did a operator there. So where those two are equal. So now if we test this, if I select BP, and then select, now notice what's happening. It looks like it's defaulting to the city and the partner location. So if I look at the partner location, it's somehow, which is very interesting, pulling up the city from this address column, which is a location type. So let's look at, here's one of the other tricks you have with dropdowns. You can tell it which property, that, especially if it returns a array of objects, which property on that object that you want to display. So I just select that drop down, click on this edit option here on to the right, and this shows me all the properties that are part of those objects. And for our intents and purposes, we want to show the name, which should be the name of the location. We're not too concerned with the search feature because we're going to have that pre-selected. These options are going to be selected based on the location, right? So once we select the location name, again, if I go back to this list, that's going to be this column here. Once we select the location name, now when I change the partners and hit the drop down, I see the location name versus the default city property. Okay. Now there's one last thing that we have to do. And this is really understanding the anatomy of these functions that we use in our formula. This function is, and at one point, here we go. I was going to say at one point it will show you an example of the table collection. So this function is actually returning all of these properties for this. This is going to give us a listing of the format of the table. It also give you a sense of the columns returned in the table. And that's why when we select this, we have to use edit to say which one of the properties we want to show. Now, understanding the shape of the table returned or the collection also defines how you need to save it. So when you select this data card, you will notice that there's the update property, and the update property determines how the record is actually saved to the SharePoint list. Now, because we're just doing selected here, it's going to save that entire record. And that entire record in this scenario is going to be all of those columns that were in that table result set. And for this column type, which is a lookup, it's actually only expecting an object with two properties, ID and value. So with that, what we have to do to stay compliant with our data type, we have to create an object, and here you just do item colon, and then comma, value colon. And now we have to plug in the properties for ID, and this is just going to be this drop down. Let's give it a name since we have to use it in the formula. V partner location. So it's going to be this drop down, V partner location dot ID. No, V partner location dot partner. No, sorry, select it dot partner, because this is the partner column, which is going to have the information that we want to say. In actuality, we can actually simplify this by, let me just finish this and then I'll show you a simpler way to store it. It actually just dawned on me. So b.selected.partner.value. Okay, so basically we have to go into the partner column off of that location list, which was, every column in the location is going to be returned. We just need to focus on the partner column, and then from there extract out the ID and value. Well, since this partner property has a subproperty of ID and value, and we're setting up an explicit object with ID and value, we can actually simplify this statement. We can simplify this statement by just doing vPartner location dot selected, which is the entire row, and then just say just the partner column. And then that's going to come in with the right format that's expected by SharePoint because this is a lookup type. Okay. Again, this is one of those scenarios that I think I need to do like a video just talking about the data card, the relationship with site columns, and what some of those values look like for the different site column types. Because once you understand that, you can make a lot of magic happen because you're not bound to a type that may be returned or may be available to you. You can actually construct those types and the values that you need to save because you understand the anatomy of the data card and the relationship with a site column. So I probably should shoot a video on that. So now for this intent and purpose, I want to say we're probably done. We want to test this out to make sure it works as expected. So here, let me go to the site requests where all my apps are in Power Apps, play this, and let's do F5, Control F5 for a hard refresh. And let's just give this a quick name. Select our project type, which is project partner. Select shell. That looks good. Select BP. That looks great. So I am getting filter options. And let's just use Madison since we've been using Madison to today. And then maybe Kevin for this one. And then submit. Now the expectation is when I go to this list, I get my requests populated with my values for a partner. And there you go. So I have shell, and I have the selection within shell. And now it looks like we are good to go. Okay. So I think we are done with wiring up our form. We have some tricky scenarios we need to work through, but for the most part, those were pretty basic. In the next video, what we're going to do, we're going to wire up these information panels, and then we also want to select this option here that says based on the selected site type, I will get a description for that site type as well as a screenshot of the selected site type. So that way from the requester, it's just another confirmation that they have the right type that they were expecting based on some of the values and attributes of that site type. And then once we wire up these other components with the form, I want to say we're done with the form, and now we can jump into Power Automate to where we actually will start to send notifications and approval requests for the site request form. That's it for this video. Any questions, please leave it in the comment section. Until we speak again, take care of yourselves, and I'll talk to you soon.